Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, February 5th, and Benjamin Netanyahu went to Washington, D.C. yesterday to talk to Trump. And then Trump came out and said that the U.S. is going to own Gaza. Some crazy stuff. So we're going to start by playing this clip, and then we'll go from there, okay?
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years.
That's insanity, right? How crazy is... I mean, it's impossible, right, what he's saying.
I don't see... we're not going to own the Gaza Strip. That's not going to happen. Israel's not going to let it happen. I think that no one else in the U.S. wants that to happen. It's extraordinary. I mean, it's just a crazy comment. This is Trump. One thing I just want to comment on is that he really is a real estate developer. That's the way he thinks about things. He's looking at a map and say, wow, that would be a nice piece of territory. Let's take Greenland and then Canada. And and now he's looking at Gaza, seafront property right there on the Mediterranean, pleasant climate. Hey, we could do some wonderful things with this, this piece of land here. It seems to be the way he really thinks. It's quite extraordinary. Now, and I think it also needs to be pointed out that these were not off-the-cuff remarks. That's not Trump does that kind of thing all the time. He says some things to the reporters on an airplane or whatever, and he's just best, half the time anyway, just to ignore what he said. But these were prepared remarks. They were written down. And more than that, they were posted on X and then reposted. So, I mean, that again demonstrates the seriousness with which he delivered these remarks.
Well, if you watch that clip, when he says, we'll own it, that seemed to have been an off-the-cuff remark, because you can see Netanyahu, how he looked at him.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? It seemed like it was the first time Netanyahu heard that.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that, right? Obviously, what's Netanyahu thinking?
I feel like what was maybe discussed and prepared was the idea that the U.S. would develop it, but it's with that it was going to always be for the Israelis, that it was going to be part of Israel was kind of the plan. Yeah. But then when Trump said we'll own it, you could see Netanyahu was like, "What? This isn't so." That seemed a little off the cuff, but
okay, well, possibly, but again, I think it was posted and reposted. I mean that very remark. But maybe, like, in his mind, we own it. It's just like we'll take responsibility for it. Perhaps that's what he's saying. Again, a president really shouldn't speak so loosely. It just can't happen. But also it's clear that he's doubling down on the ethnic cleansing idea, because, the notion is, we just get them out of here and, get them settled in nice houses, really nice houses in places like Jordan and Egypt. And everybody's happy. He really seems to believe in that vision, and I'm sure that Netanyahu shares it. Sir, we will drive them out. The Americans will pay for their new housing somewhere. But again, that's not quite so crazy. And the thing, that a lot of people are shrieking and hollering about this, as they should. But the truth is that that's what the previous administration wanted to do. They just weren't so open about it. I think some of Anthony Blinken's first visits were to Jordan and Egypt, trying to convince them to take Palestinian refugees. Really, and they said no, because they understood what was going on. This is just ethnic cleansing, and you're making us complicit in it.
Right. Trump says the quiet part out loud.
Yeah. Right. And that is, it's actually good in a way. It's not, maybe it's maybe it's, it actually is harmful to all these causes like Zionism and globalism. The previous administrations had a way of speaking about these things that was fundamentally false, that hid a lot of the ugly realities, especially in connection with Zionism. He just says it out loud, and I think that's actually good. It hurts the cause.
Right. So where do you see this going, though? I mean, like you said, it's impossible. Jordan and Egypt, they won't accept this. And if they did, we would probably see a revolution in Jordan and Egypt.
Right.
They're already at breaking point, and the United States is paying off these governments, or maybe not Jordan anymore for so much longer, but paying off these governments to, allow to support the Israeli regime. But the people don't want this. This is clearly something that is a huge point of tension for these countries. So
right. Yeah, I think it's highly, highly unlikely that he can convince them to do it. Now, he will certainly make threats and apply leverage, and we have to say that he does have leverage in this case. Again, both governments have been funded to the tune of tens of billions of dollars, over the decades, and they are dependent on the U.S. And they're both very poor countries. I think especially Egypt, and without American help, they'd be in real trouble. Now they also get a lot of, I think, economic subsidies from Saudi Arabia, so maybe there's an alternative for them. But if you really apply the pressure, I still don't think they would say yes to it. It's just so fundamentally against their own interests. One thing in the case of the Egyptian government, they are actually very anti-Hamas. They have a Muslim Brotherhood, an underground organization now. But this Muslim Brotherhood won the only election that Egypt has had in decades. It's, a good 10, 15 years ago. It was after the, so-called Arab Spring. The Muslim Brotherhood came to power through popular, fair elections. But then they were overthrown by the current government. Now we have Sisi. And he detests them and considers them a mortal threat. The Muslim Brotherhood is very closely allied to Hamas. So the thing is, if he does not want 1 million Gazans on his territory, he knows that they're Hamas and Hamas supporters, and that they're his deadly enemies. He does not want to see them there. And then over in the case of Jordan, as we've pointed out earlier, more than 50% of the population is Palestinian. They're very, very unhappy with the policies of the Jordan government. And if you add another, 1 million Gazans to Jordan, that just tips the scale again, of that much more in the direction of revolution, of anger and dissatisfaction with the current regime, led by the king. So I think both of these countries probably look at this as existential. There are a lot of things they're willing to bend to the U.S. and they do it again and again, but I think it highly unlikely that they'll give in on this. This was because it really puts their own regimes at risk.
So do you think this is just Trump doing Trump, just getting everybody riled up and just saying things, or is there actually some substance behind this? What does this mean?
It's hard to know. It's just with Trump. It's just. Is there an actual plan? Does he know that this is just impossible? I don't think he does. I think he probably really believes in it. I guess, when I first heard about Greenland and Canada, that was my thought. I didn't know. He was just he was doing something to grab attention and, stir the pot. But now I'm not so sure, because he's been actually come back to these themes again and again. And you do see this sort of this recurring theme of real estate, right?
Right.
I think he's serious, but it just can't happen. The U.S. is not going to own Gaza, and I don't think they're going to succeed in their ethnic cleansing effort. But it may be that part of what happened anyway, between Netanyahu and Trump, was that Trump said, "Hey, let's do this ceasefire. I know you don't want to do it, but if you do it, I'll help you with Gaza, and I'll arrange to have these other countries take in the Gazans, and I'll help you with reconstruction and so forth." It may very well be kind of a carrot that he offered to Netanyahu, prior to the ceasefire agreement.
Yeah,
but I don't think he really can carry through on it.
Right. Maybe it's because he feels like he's on a roll with the way he handled Colombia, Canada, and Mexico, threatening them with tariffs, and then they, made concessions and moved in. He's like, look, I can do this. We're the United States. I'm the biggest kid on the block.
Yeah.
I have leverage over Jordan, Egypt. Let's just do this, clear it out, we'll move the Palestinians. And in his own mind, he's probably justifying it in also humanitarian way. Well, I'll save these people. And the way he talks about it is like, well, like he said, like a real estate agent, it's like, we'll get them places with lots of sunlight. Great. It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah,
like
right.
with no idea that this is their home, that they've been going through what much of the world, and both of you and I agree, is a genocide over the past 15 months that was done by U.S. bombs. He talks about like, the place is a mess. It's unlivable. It's like, because we bombed it, because we we were complicit in destroying over 90% of the homes there and slaughtering, who knows? He did say in another part of that, the press conference afterwards, that he was saying 1.7, 1.8 million, what happened in roofs. So is that almost an acknowledgement that the population of Gaza used to be 2.1 or 2.3, 2.3? Yeah, that we killed 500,000 people. I mean, is that what he's almost saying?
That may actually be an accurate number. We've, interestingly, like the direct killed number has now jumped. They put it up to 61,000. And what happened? Now that the health authority can go and visit these sites, they've already found, I think, approximately 1,000 bodies, several hundreds of bodies, and they've added that to the count. But they're just looking at these places and going over all their records, and they've determined that there are 14,000 people that are just gone and are almost certainly under the rubble, and we may never get them. Either just too deep under the rubble, or they were just vaporized by a 2,000-pound bomb or something. So it's now over 61,000. But as we pointed out many times, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because for every person that's directly killed, there's typically 4 to 15 other people that die in a war. So it could very easily be something like 500,000 or 600,000 total people that actually died as a result of this attack on Gaza.
Do you think we'll actually see an American presence in Gaza? Will he make that move? I mean, when he says America owns Gaza, what is he talking about? Are we going to be sending troops in to push out the people of Gaza? I mean, it's not.
Well, it sounds like. Well, yeah, I don't know. It's not clear. But yeah, he's talking about sending troops there. Demining. Removing unexploded ordnance and all that thing, and clearing the rubble. And sounds like he's going to send the Marines in to do this work.
You really think that's what we'll do? We would send in American troops into Gaza.
Yeah, I don't think so. Actually, I don't think Trump would actually do that. I think he's imagining that the Gazans will leave voluntarily to go to their sunny new homes, and then the troops will go in.
Yeah, because
he
like
didn't
you said,
actually spell it out in that much detail, but I think that's probably what he's thinking.
Right. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, in his mind, it's just he's a realtor. He's saying like, look, your home's destroyed. We got even a better home here. Look at it. It's great. Look at the sunlight coming through these windows, and he thinks that he can just do it, and he can convince Jordan and Egypt to take them in. But it's impossible. The world wouldn't allow it, right? I mean, like, it just can't happen, right? I mean, Iran wouldn't let it happen. The Axis of Resistance is going to fire back up. I mean, and then
I don't know. I mean, the world might let it happen. But like I say, for Egypt and for Jordan, I think it's highly, highly unlikely. I can't say it's impossible. They might just decide this is terrible, but we don't have a choice. My government's going to collapse if the Americans suspend aid, or just cut off the aid flow. We'll just have to do this. But I don't think they will, because I think they do rightly regard it as an existential threat, and I don't think in the end that Trump can actually make good on the threat of cutting off aid to these countries. And the reason I say that is that there was a reason the U.S. did this in the first place, and that was actually to protect Israel. It was all, part of the Zionist project. And so, the Zionists, I don't think, are going to let this happen. He can make the threat, but I don't think they'll let him carry through on it. And I think maybe the Egyptian and Jordanian leaders understand this. So, yeah, I think it's extremely unlikely that this will happen.
Right. Do you think, oh, I just slipped my mind. Well, just about, just Trump saying the quiet part out loud, just sort of saying, yeah, we're ethnically cleansing the land. We're pushing out all these, 2 million or how many Gazans are left alive. We're just going to push them out of their homeland. And do you think that this is actually going to damage Israel more? I mean, Netanyahu, Israel, I think they feel like they had a great win. If you watch the, not this press conference, but they had another interview where they're in the White House in front of the fireplace talking. Right. You could see, I've never seen Netanyahu look so happy in my life.
It's true.
So
I was struck by that too.
It was the first thing I noticed. Man, Netanyahu is on just riding high now. He's on cloud 9. He's feeling really good about this. But I'm wondering, do you think this is good for Israel in the long run? Because like we said, this is saying the quiet part out loud, saying that, we're ethnically going to cleanse the land. And even if they do somehow convince Jordan and Egypt to do this, I think it's going to backfire and blow up in their face, right? We're going to have these governments that have been bought off and paid for to support the Israeli regime. I think they will collapse and fall. I think we'll see a reaction from Iran. I think we'll see increased activity in Lebanon. I don't think this is good for Israel. Well, what are your thoughts?
Well, about saying the quiet part out loud, you could say that it's actually that's what's been happening in Israel. That in the last couple of years, I think it probably started even earlier, but ever since October 7th, there are more and more people, Netanyahu himself, who have been saying the quiet part out loud, just very openly talking about greater Israel and about ethnic cleansing, not just in connection with Gaza, but also the West Bank. So in a way, Trump is simply reflecting what's going on in Israel. And it shows that there's just a lack of concern. There used to be a real concern, and still exists, again, it's, amongst many Israelis, but not among this new, right-wing coalition. They just don't seem to care. And the truth is that, their reputation has been, I think, irretrievably damaged on the world stage anyway. The great majority of people in the world are looking at Israel in shock. Many of them used to have positive opinions or rather neutral opinions, but now they see Israel as a true rogue state. But Israel doesn't care because they have their U.S. backer, and they do have their very powerful backers in Western Europe. I think it's a mistake. Whatever their international position has been greatly weakened. They can get away with it, but they become their position. Maybe it's not precarious now, but eventually it could be. In the U.S., it looks like the support is rock solid. In places like France or the U.K., it's not so clear. There's a lot of people in those countries that are very unhappy about what's going on, and there could be some kind of a new government could come in that changes things. Now, I guess in the near future that's not obvious, but it's not at all certain that will happen. In fact, we could even go in the other direction. But in the long run, and I maybe say in the medium term, like over the next 5 years or so, they could start to lose some support, very important support in Western Europe. And in the long run in the U.S., I think they put their project at risk because the younger generation is not nearly as supportive of Zionism as the older generations are. And, when those young people eventually begin to enter into the establishment, to assume office and so forth, we could see a real change. So I think they put their long-term existence at real risk, through their actions and through their words.
Well, in the short term, though, do you think that this is a big victory for Israel? What do you think, or is this?
Well,
or is this a big nothing burger? Is this a big, we will just see the same old? I mean,
right. Well, because I don't see it as a solution. I mean, what they're talking about is just a lot of nonsense. Right. And what Trump is saying, it's just, like we say, it's very, very unlikely that this can actually happen. So what will happen? You haven't fixed anything. You still have this humanitarian catastrophe, and Hamas is still there. That was one of Netanyahu's stated objectives, and it remains them. He repeats it. He says, we've got to do it. And so that's one reason why I think he's bent. If he can't get the Americans to arrange this real estate deal, he wants to break the ceasefire. It's quite clear.
Right. I mean, when he's saying we will own Gaza, it's almost like, are you just saying that Israel's passing off the genocide baton to America now, and that we're going to continue with this process? Like, I just, what if, I don't think America, and I don't think Trump likes the idea of just dropping bombs like Israel does. That Israel just bombing these refugee camps and these caravans and just these atrocities.
Right. Sometimes he does actually express some, some sort of compassion or concern. It does come. I think he's he is not a bloodthirsty warmonger. Let's just put it that way. He's crude. He's narcissistic, but I get the sense again that he actually does not really like war, and he would just prefer to do things differently, like through a real estate deal. And that's what he's putting forth. And he seems to, in his mind, this is a wonderful thing. I guess it certainly is better than just killing everybody in Gaza.
Right. Yeah, the language that he uses when he refers to the Palestinians isn't dehumanizing language that we traditionally see from the people like Lindsey Graham and of course the Israeli politicians. So he almost is like he is trying to negotiate a deal, trying to convince the Palestinians this is going to be great for you. We got it. But then I'm thinking, well, if the U.S. does have some type of presence, and it's not exactly what Israel's doing, a military presence where we're just dropping in bombs or sending in Marines. Perhaps it's more of a reconstructive humanitarian purpose. Right. That is kind of how Trump, I think, thinks. But if we go there as a humanitarian presence and a reconstructive presence, and we start to uncover tens of thousands of bodies, they see, they firsthand these American, relief efforts are there on the ground, and they see the genocide with their own eyes. I think that could be very damaging to Israel if they do that, right? I mean, just
well, it certainly is possible. I think even Witkoff, remember his envoy, the one that it applied pressure apparently to Netanyahu and got him to agree to the deal. He applied pressure. I'm sure there were carrots as well as sticks, and maybe we're looking at one of the carrots right now. But he went into Gaza. He's the first official to do that, U.S. official in a long, long time.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he did express shock at what he saw. And, so, it could have that effect. It might not actually be so good for Israel. You're right. It just let people see with their own eyes. A lot of these people have been shielded from the reality. And, I can stop and say, well, wait a second. This just doesn't make sense. This is not how you wage a war, against a guerrilla band. This is, why is this hospital a pile of rubble? Why is this university a pile of rubble?
Right. Well, and I mean, they say 70% of the casualties of the dead in Gaza are women and children. If you're there and you're just pulling children, toddlers, babies, it's like that. It's so horrible. It's just how can anybody...
Right.
Feel like, oh, this is great. We do a good job, Israel. We're here to help you out now. It's like, whoa, what did you guys do? This was not okay, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I hope so. I mean, I don't know. We're just speculating because with Trump, you just don't know. But this is pretty crazy statement, and this is the one unsolvable solution. It feels like with the United States and our relationship with Israel and the Palestinians. Another aspect of it I want to ask you about is the ceasefire agreement. Like, does this affect the ceasefire agreement? I mean, what is happening with that? They negotiated this deal. Is it something that was just another ruse? And now we're
it's hard to say again. It's just we're getting a lot of contradictory signals from Israel or concerning Israel. The Israeli press is saying that the Americans are pushing the Israelis to continue the ceasefire. We're in the first stage of it. That's going to come to an end, I believe, in approximately 3 weeks. And then there's supposed to be a second stage that hasn't been, the outlines of which already are known, but the details of which have not been fully negotiated. And I think the negotiations over that second stage just began or are about to begin. And again, the Israelis are saying that the Americans are pushing, the Israeli press is saying that the Americans are pushing the Israeli government and Netanyahu to continue with the ceasefire, to negotiate a workable settlement or, agreement for the next stage. But Netanyahu himself is basically saying that he's not going to do it. And we'll see. It's interesting. When in the past, the Israeli government has always had its way. It's just, for decades. I can think like the last time where we had a U.S. president that told the Israelis no, and the Israelis just had to back down was probably in, the 1950s with Eisenhower.
Been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but really, exactly. I mean, they've been literally gotten away with murder, like in the case of the USS Liberty in the '67 war, and Johnson just covered it up for them, right? So anyway, this has gone on for a long time, where the Israelis just simply have their way. So this is be an interesting case. Now, as I said earlier, Trump might be peculiarly strong, have an advantage that other presidents didn't have, that it's just like his Zionist credentials are unquestioned because of what he did in the first term. The embassy in Jerusalem, the recognition of the Golan Heights, and then just the extreme rhetoric that he has been coming out of his mouth ever since, he came, since last fall's electoral campaign. And then he has also, lifted restrictions. The very minor restrictions that the Biden administration put on Israel have been lifted, and he's giving them 2,000-pound bombs and 1,000-pound bombs, and he's the so it may be because again he has these Zionist credentials that he might actually have his way with Netanyahu. We'll see. It'll be interesting. Now it's.
What do you mean have his way with Netanyahu?
Yeah, I just said that Netanyahu does not want the ceasefire to continue, but maybe Trump will be able to twist his arm and make it happen. And that would be a change. It would be like this is not the kind of relationship that we're used to. But oddly, it's because Trump has a reputation of just being this extreme Zionist that he might be able to do it. It's because he's not exposed on his right flank the way that Biden was. Biden was accused of being a Hamas sympathizer and so on. That made him actually very weak, and it made it very hard for him to ever have an open conflict with Netanyahu. Because if he did, he risked doing something like that, he would come under attack. They say, look, he's not a friend of Israel, and it's just hard for people to say that Trump is not a friend of Israel. So he might be able to really, apply the pressure and make it happen. He might do it because he's still got in his mind it's this great real estate deal down the road. So, in the end, who knows what it's actually going to lead to. But we could see it happen. Now, there's no question, it's not like the Zionist grip on American government has been loosened. I think it's clearly just as strong. And let's never forget, again, the mega donors that put Trump in office, they were Zionists. We're talking about $100 million from Miriam Edelson. And and at the same time that he's talking about Gaza, he's also been talking, we're hearing a lot of talk about the West Bank. I think one thing Miriam Edelson wanted was that for the Israel to outright annex the West Bank and to change its name to Judea and Samaria. And I think Trump very well may be on board with that. So anyway, things are let's not, even if, I think it would be a very important event and, it would show a real change in the power dynamics if Trump is able to pressure Netanyahu into continuing the ceasefire. But let's not say that, oh, okay, yeah, now the Zionism has lost its grip. No, it's just kind of taken on a slightly different form. And it continues, it's just Netanyahu personally maybe lost this, but it's going to go forward. The Greater Israel Project has not been abandoned and continues to receive support from the U.S.
But how can you say that the ceasefire agreement could go forward when the president of the United States, who pushed this ceasefire agreement, that was something that they got Netanyahu to admit, said that this wasn't Biden, this was all Trump that arranged the ceasefire. When Trump just straight up says, yeah, we're going to ethnically cleanse the land, all the people of Gaza have to leave and they can't come back, doesn't that annul the ceasefire? I mean, why were they fighting for the past 15 months?
Right. Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, it certainly does put it at risk. I mean, but maybe Hamas hears that and they just think, that's never going to happen. That's stupid.
But there has to be some demand for clarity. For me, if I was a Palestinian in Gaza, it'd be like, we've just been had again. There is this agreement, and now they tell us that we all have to leave, and Trump is going to build his Riviera of the Middle East on our homeland. Like, it's just another ruse, in my opinion, by the United States. He did the same thing with Minsk 1, Minsk 2, with Iran, the JCPOA. And it gets to a point where it's just like, this is also a big problem for America. It's just, we get into the point where just people realize you cannot negotiate with the United States because they just tear up the agreements, they trick you, they never hold up their end of the bargain, and then they spin it and try to make you the bad guy. It just, I don't know.
Right. Well, there's no question that the Palestinians in general are used to this. I mean, this has happened to them again and again. So I think Hamas drove a real hard bargain, and there was a lot of pressure for them to make more concessions earlier, and they didn't. In the end, it was Israel that came around and accepted the Hamas, position. Now, I think they still see it in their interest for the ceasefire to go ahead. I'm sure that they've noticed what Trump has said. I don't know exactly how they're going to respond to that. I don't think it actually derails the talks, but it is obviously going to be a matter of concern.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to ask you, how do you think the Palestinians feel about Trump saying this, that they'll own Gaza? Because, your initial reaction is just shock. Like, what? This is insanity. But then if you kind of think about that, if America was more on the ground directly involved, it just can't be worse than what Israel is doing. It's actually could be a thing where maybe the Palestinians might actually be able to get their side of the story out to the Americans if the Americans are starting to be there on the ground in some capacity. I don't know if they will.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a big question. First of all, I don't know that they ever will be on the ground. And then it's the idea that they move in after the Palestinians have been moved out. So they wouldn't really have a chance to communicate directly. Who knows?
Right. I feel like we got a million questions and we have no answers because it's just so...
Right. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. Well, do you know how some other big world leaders have reacted to this, and namely, Putin and Pezeshkian in Iran and Xi Jinping? Has there been any statements or?
I remember hearing a condemnation from the Russians, which is not at all surprising. A condemnation from, I believe, Olaf Scholz, and it probably was echoed by other Western leaders. Again, with these, I think in the case of the Russians, it's sincere. This has been their position all along, that they've been in favor of this two-state solution, and I think we're truly in favor of it for a long time. But among the Western nations, I have to say that it's really just a matter of, rhetoric. They don't like the fact that he's saying these things out loud. But the Western Europeans have been basically complicit in this ongoing dispossession of the Palestinians, ever since 1967. They have always taken a public position that they're against it. There shouldn't be settlements, but there's never any consequences for the Israelis. And they've discovered that. They just go, for the longest time, they've just gone very slowly, steadily been dispossessing the Palestinians, especially in the West Bank. And so, I have to say, like Olaf Scholz, he's part of that establishment that's been complicit in this ongoing ethnic cleansing, you could say. But he condemned Trump's statement because basically you're not supposed to say that. We good Westerners are not supposed to talk like this. Now all their lofty talk often covers a real ugly reality. It certainly does in the case of Palestine.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it seems like I just feel like this is going to end up ending very badly for Israel. They seem to feel like they're on a roll. What's happened in Syria, they've captured more of the Golan Heights, and now this recent statement with Trump just saying that we're going to kick everybody out of Gaza. Like you said, they move very slowly, but now Israel's moving at a pace where they're going to get their comeuppance. They can't just keep doing this forever. And it's like you said, the world has kind of turned on them. Has turned on them. And if they start doing what they're doing in southern Lebanon and Gaza to the West Bank, which it seems like they're kind of doing.
Yeah,
I saw demolitions of homes in Jenin. They're just blowing up buildings and just moving. It's like, when is it going to end? And how is it going to end? It just has to end. It can't go on forever.
Right.
This is insanity.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if there's any answer to that.
Yeah, there isn't any answer. That's right. It's just not going to end well. Trump has his sunny vision, but it's not going to end that way. And it's even if things are temporarily better in Gaza, that they have this current ceasefire holds, and the Gazans aren't suffering as badly as they were before, but they're still suffering. It must be. People should know that actually the Israelis really haven't kept their part of the bargain. They were supposed to allow so many, relief trucks in a day, and they've been restricting them. Definitely more are coming in than before. So I think the Gazans aren't in immediate danger of starvation. But for example, they're not getting the tents that they need. All these people, their homes were destroyed. They need something to protect them from the elements. They need tents, but the Israelis have been greatly reducing the number of tents. It's just the sort of thing they've done, for decades in Gaza. They subjected Gaza to this very kind of cruel treatment. And the sad truth, it just seems to me, whatever happens, even if the ceasefire succeeds, it goes all the way through, Gaza is still at the mercy of Israel, and Israel will continue to apply the screws to Gaza, will continue to deprive them of necessary materials. For example, they're going to need a lot of concrete and other building materials to rebuild what was a home to over 2 million people. And I have trouble believing that the Israelis are not going to restrict that, just make it very difficult for them. I think that clearly they will, just knowing everything about their past behavior and their current attitudes. So it just does not look good for Gaza, even if the ceasefire succeeds. Now, things are looking, a lot worse for the West Bank. The West Bank has been settled. The settlers have been moving in and taking the West Bank, a village at a time, an olive grove at a time, and that's been going on for many, many years. But now it seems to be accelerating. They're starting to get some of the Gaza treatment over there too. And there's the open talk about annexing the West Bank.
Well, there is Iran going to be able to, do you think they're going to do anything about this? I was listening to Professor Marandi, I don't know, a week or so ago, but he said that, Iran is still going to strike back. Their promised retaliation. He said that, everybody's said, oh, Iran's not going to do it. Because it's been, 3 months now? Something like this. That's my position. I'm like, yeah, they're not going to retaliate. It's been too long. The deterrence effect is lost now. People don't even remember what they're retaliating for. The majority of the world. So it's, but Morandi says that they will. So I don't know. How do you feel about this? Do you think that Iran is going to step up? There's also been rumors of the U.S. starting to communicate with Iran and potentially opening up a embassy in Damascus. I don't know if that's, or not in Damascus, or in Tehran. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, I haven't heard those rumors. I know Trump recently made a statement that he says, no, we don't want to bomb Iran to smithereens. We want to get a new, just renegotiate this nuclear deal, the JCPOA. The JCPOA was a very, very intrusive deal that virtually guaranteed that the Iranians could not develop a nuclear weapon. They submitted to some very, again, intrusive and thorough monitoring and controls. So he was an idiot. If that was his main concern, he was really an idiot to tear up that agreement. That did not work. And then the Iranians would actually be kind of crazy to try to do it again, because the U.S., first of all, even under Obama, after the JCPOA was reached, one of the first things that the U.S. was supposed to do was to lift economic sanctions, and they didn't do it. They didn't even keep their part of the agreement. And then the Iranians continued to keep their part of the agreement until Trump took office and actually exited the agreement. At that point, the Iranians said, "This is ridiculous. We're not doing it." So, why would they go into it again after that experience? I don't see it. So that's kind of an aside. So he's talking about negotiating a new agreement, but I just don't see that going anywhere. Will the Iranians retaliate? I don't know. They've said they would. Professor Morandi knows, Iranian politics a lot better than I do. So he may very well be right. He's probably right. But I do have my doubts about it. I understand. I mean, they are committed to, resisting Zionism. That's kind of part of what the Iranian revolution was all about. I think it may even be written into their constitution. So it is something that they've, quite serious about, and they've shown that they've been serious about it over the years, and they've paid the price. That's the reason why they are targeted in the way that no other Middle Eastern country is. So yeah, there's always a chance, they just may be biding their time. They have this agreement with Russia, and maybe what they've decided to do is that now they have Russia. I think everybody recognizes that part of this agreement, well, it certainly is, it's mostly economic, but part of it is military and security. And that military and security aspect is going to definitely extend to air defense. And they may see that they have the need to have they already have formidable air defense, but it needs to be that much better. They want to maybe bring it up to, true Russian standards. And so they know that if they are going to retaliate or engage in any kind of, air war with the U.S., with Israel, and there's always a possibility that the U.S. will become directly involved, they need to be prepared for that. I think they've already made a lot of preparations. They have a lot of facilities underground, for example. I think recently they advertised an underground missile city. I mean, they actually released some footage of that. It was very impressive. They know what they're up against, and they've been preparing for a long time, but maybe they, again, they're actually very cautious and deliberate. They're not the wild-eyed mullahs that we tend to characterize them as they are. They're very rational, and they may have made a decision that maybe we have to spend another year on just, speculating, building up our air defenses, because when we get into a shooting war with Israel and quite possibly with the U.S., we have to have the best defenses possible. This is just speculation, but that may be what's going on.
Something that we've seen with the new Trump administration and hearing Marco Rubio was this idea of we're going back to diplomacy. Marco Rubio said that out front. It's like, we need to engage in diplomacy. That's how things are done. But then I'm wondering just what we've been talking about recently about the lack of trust now, that the JCPOA, how we didn't hold up our end of the deal of ending the sanctions, the Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 accords, how it was openly said that it was a ruse, Merkel on television saying, yeah, we never planned to keep our end of the bargain,
And also, the French president, Hollande, he was president at the time. It's quite remarkable. Poroshenko, who was the Ukrainian president, he said the same thing.
Right. So we may want to engage in diplomacy, but hasn't our ability to engage in diplomacy been greatly weakened by the fact that we just don't hold our end of the bargain? Who wants to be diplomatic with us? It's like, well, you can't trust these guys. Anytime there's an agreement, there's a good chance that it was just a ruse, especially in these types of high stake situations where you want to have an agreement with Iran or you want to have to settle something with Russia or Gaza, because we have shown that we have not been honest with this. And the Chinese as well are probably like, well, we can't trust them because they view us in the same boat. Okay, you have some agreements with England or France, whatever, they're all the same pot. But what we're actually talking about, where real diplomacy needs to be enacted, what is our ability to really engage in diplomacy now after what we've done the past 10, really past 15 years, sort of just with these continuing, maybe it goes back longer, I don't know.
There's no question about it that our ability to do diplomacy has been greatly damaged. And it takes a long time. Trust is essential, right? It takes a long, long time to build up trust. So it's not something that we can fix overnight. We have to start making goodwill gestures, communicating regularly. Start off with something small, not that's existential, because let's say Russia or Iran or whatever is not going to risk, their very existence on an agreement with the West. I think that's highly unlikely. And that's one reason why I think there aren't going to be any, a negotiated settlement to the war in Ukraine. But maybe we can succeed with smaller deals and then truly keep our end of the bargain. And that over time, that will allow trust to grow, and eventually to the point where we can do real diplomacy on important questions again. But it's going to take a while to get back there. One thing is, we need to start communicating, and maybe the first step we could take is that we could actually allow the Russians to appoint an ambassador to Washington, D.C. The last one retired, I believe, in November, and the Americans have been holding up, preventing the Russians from replacing him. And so they don't even have somebody to talk to there, at the ambassador level. So that's, let's start talking again. Maybe let's start with some small, deal with some lesser issues and try to resolve those, and then kind of climb up the ladder that way. But we're not even on the first rung at this point.
Right. Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about with regard to Trump's statement in Gaza, or maybe I'll end with something else if we're all done?
Yeah, that's fine. You can go to something else.
Okay. Let's just say, do you believe that Trump is actually going to end this war in Ukraine? Do you think that's happening? What's your view on what's going on there?
Yeah. I don't think he will. I've said that. I think he actually wants to. He doesn't like it. Like he says it's a stupid war. But he has really two main avenues that he could take. One is to try to attempt negotiations, but I think that there's just no way. For one of the reasons I just gave you is that the Russians on for their side, they don't. They have every reason to be suspicious and not to enter into an agreement with the U.S. It's got to be an ironclad agreement. I don't know how you can do that to really guarantee that the U.S. will keep its side of the bargain. And that's hard to do. How do you make that? How do you guarantee something like that? And then that's on the Russian side, but on the U.S. side, I just don't think it's politically possible, as I said before, for Trump to accede to Russia's terms. it's just not something. It would be an admission of weakness vis-a-vis the Russians. It would be an admission that we really lost the war. And I don't think that Trump can do that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so. I mean, he's going to have too much opposition. He himself may not be willing to do it. And then even if he were willing to do it, he may just find that there's just too much opposition within his own government to it. And then what we're looking at, okay, the other avenue that he can take is which we've talked about earlier, is he can just cut off military assistance, all military equipment and munitions to Ukraine. And that would bring the war to an end rather quickly, I think in a month's time, at most 2 months. Now, the problem with that approach, I mean, it's easier, and he can justify it, say, this is Biden's war. He lost it. This was stupid. The Ukrainians are corrupt. They're crazy. And, we could, like we say, I think it would be really, really important to change the narrative. If he does all that work, I think maybe he can get away with it. I don't know if he really is going to be able to do that. If he's not able to change the narrative and you cut off supplies to Ukraine, what's going to happen when the Russians, let's say, cross the Dnieper and start marching towards Odessa or marching towards Kiev? We don't know how far they're going to go. At some point, there's just going to be panic maybe not in the streets, but certainly within, government offices all throughout the West. And there's going to be a lot of shrieking and say, look, what has Trump's done? The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. And I don't know what that will lead to, because I don't think really there's a whole lot we can do about it. But there's going to be a political price to pay. So he may just finally say, this is a really stupid war, but I just can't, I inherited it and I can't get out of it.
You really think so? You don't think kind of his moves with USAID, stopping the funding of these NGOs, and 90% of Ukrainian media was being funded by the United States. Like that in itself, I think is almost a death knell to the Ukrainian regime.
Right.
Right.
Well, with Trump, there's just, I don't know, I would like to believe that there is a coherent strategy. But with Trump, you just never can tell. Like, we just saw what he said in connection with Gaza. And then in Ukraine, what he was just saying, we can just take their rare earths and then, pay for the war that way. And it's just sort of like a businessman looking at it. And earlier he was talking about threatening Russia. Maybe he's realizing that's not going to work now. I'd like to say there's a coherent strategy. The one person that really laid it out and made it clear to me that he understood what was going on in the world was, again, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. And, what he said was quite extraordinary. It's the sort of thing that's been said in dissident, anti-Western hegemony media for years. And he was talking like that. And I very much got the sense that, again, he understood what he was saying. He wasn't just mouthing some words. He understood the problem at a very kind of high conceptual level. And so, there is a coherence there, I think, clearly in Marco Rubio's mind. I don't know about Trump. Maybe, again, because he's Secretary of State, maybe he can help to guide Trump through this. Trump is, I think he has a lot of good instincts. One thing he's done is that he's starting to humanize the Russians, right? We've talked about he loved the Russian people. I think recently there was a hockey game or something. He went out and particularly congratulated this Russian hockey player. And I think, those are small gestures, but they're important, because there has been, these last 4 years have been a time of just kind of unrelenting demonization, not just of Putin and the Russian government, but of Russia in general. And maybe, we're seeing, so, he clearly has some good instincts, but then he has some really crazy thoughts, like the rare earths and that kind of thing. And I don't know what side of Trump is going to really win in the end, or if, this one kind of untethered, real estate mogul side of him is going to destroy all those good impulses, or run counter to those good impulses. And I think it's just too early to say. Like with Biden, you knew what you had and it was all bad. Let's say there was no chance. There was never any expression of interest in really ending the war. But with Trump, I think there is an interest. It's clear, first of all, unclear, first of all, whether or not he himself has enough of a coherent strategy to really move forward on it. I believe Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance and people like that do, and maybe they will be able to convince Trump, to follow some coherent strategy. There's reason to hope that. Um, but then Trump is this loose cannon, so we don't know if at some point he might just do a 180 and decide to escalate. He'll get convinced by other people, because don't forget that no matter what, he's been doing some house cleaning, and that's good. But this house is big and it's full of neocons, and there are going to be a lot of people, including some of the people that he's appointed, that will try to work to convince him, to take an opposite approach. They'll tell him, "Hey, you got to demonstrate strength," and I think he's kind of vulnerable to that sort of argument. You got to escalate in order to de-escalate. Like, you got to really put the pressure on the Russians, and then the Russians will come to the table. And I'm sure he's hearing both things. He's hearing the realist argument, but he's also hearing the neocon argument. I think his inclination is to go with the realists, but he just may also make the political calculation that he can't do it. It's too early to say. I'm remain pessimistic, but there is a chance. I just don't even want to put a number on it, because we're in such early days right now, and Trump is just so difficult to predict, that I don't want to say anything about what's going to happen.
It's Trump. He's only been in office for a little over 2 weeks, and it's just been a whirlwind, man. Right. It's just like, or do you think we should expect this breakneck speed of just change for 4 years? We might be looking at a completely different world by the end. And who knows where it's going to end up? It could be great. It could be the end of the world. It's just...
Yeah, right. It's really, we're just going for a ride, and I don't know where it's going to end up. There's clearly... Like you have to say that he's had some successes, at least for the moment, here in the Western Hemisphere. He made the terror threats against Canada and Mexico, but now those have been suspended. They haven't been actually canceled. He hasn't rescinded these threats, but I think it's been, in one case 30 days, the other case 50 days. And both countries have agreed to send troops to the border and try to, to put an end to the flow of fentanyl, in particular, into the United States. And if he just achieves that and then rescinds the tariff orders, you'd have to say, hey, this was a success, right? But we just don't know. Maybe he won't know when to stop, but maybe he does know when to stop. I'm not going to make a judgment yet. I'm just watching this extraordinary show. And then in the case of Panama, he sent Marco Rubio down there, and the Panamanians have agreed to withdraw from the Belt and Road Initiative and not to renew the contracts by 2 Hong Kong companies, that have been working at the port facilities, providing services at the port facilities there in the Panama Canal. So you'd have to say that was a success from his point of view. It's just like to push the Chinese out from our region. Now, I hope that he applies this principle, of spheres of influence consistently. And again, Marco Rubio laid it out. He said, we live in a multipolar world. We need to accept that. That's the reality. And he say, okay, this is our sphere of influence. We don't want the Chinese in here. But now can you stop and just think, what the Chinese are thinking about, why are we right off their coast? Why are we helping to build up the military of what they regard as, and we also acknowledge to be, a renegade province, which is Taiwan? If they have their own interests, and we're within our rights to demand the expulsion of the Chinese from the Panama Canal, then why do we have the right to be right off the coast of China? Right? It's obviously a huge double standard, which the Chinese can't fail to see, and then even more so in connection with Russia. So it's just hopefully okay. Just as I said, it's not like this is all pretty and fair or whatever. This idea of spheres of influence, of great powers, multipolarity is not a utopian vision, but it's a realistic vision. And it part of it is that you need to acknowledge the security interests of other great powers. That's been the problem, really, is that we refuse to acknowledge the security interests of for example, Russia. And that's why we have this war. The Russians were saying, hey, you need to do this. Hey, this is really important to us. This is existential. This is, threatens, our continued existence. You need to listen to us, and we need to negotiate a solution. We refuse to. We would not allow ourselves to be concerned with their security interests, only ours. Now, we have to see, is this going to really change? I think there's some hope that it will somewhat. Again, because of things that Trump himself has said, I think his own obvious inclinations, and then because of this really, to me, quite shocking statement by Rubio. Clearly, he understands what's going on. We have a different team in power. With Trump there in the middle, he's kind of a human wrecking ball. He is kind of the bull in the china shop. So it makes me reluctant to make any sort of firm predictions. But even so, I think we are seeing a reorientation of American foreign policy, something that we haven't seen. We've been on one track for decades and decades. And this may finally be changing. I don't think we're going to see a U-turn. I wish we would, but it's, to switch metaphors, it's like a super tanker. It takes a long, long time for it to turn and start heading off in another direction. But I think maybe we're just seeing a little bit of a turn. And if at the end of these 4 years, there is, I don't think we'll see dramatic changes in policy, but if we see any significant change in orientation that's consistently held throughout these years, I think that's very meaningful. And hopefully it will be continued by future administrations.
Yeah, let's hope we can get there. There's so many things that are coming out of left field, though. Like so many things that I just never thought would happen. I mean, just Greenland, this whole Gaza thing, everything has just been, but it is true. If you take a step back, one of the biggest things is that acceptance of a multipolar world from Marco Rubio, this idea, and then the signaling of the end of the U.S. unipolar moment, the hegemony. Right. It is.
Yeah. I think it is hugely great. Yeah, I think it's hugely significant. Just the fact that a Secretary of State said that. We haven't heard a Secretary of State speak like that since, I don't know when, and not in my lifetime. Certainly not since the unipolar moment, since the fall of the Soviet Union. We haven't heard anything like that. So I think it's hugely significant. Even if he doesn't really follow through, he's not able to implement it fully. And I think we have to be honest that it won't be possible for him to implement these ideas fully. But if he can even implement a bit of it, or even just the fact that he said it, I think means a lot, because it shows that these ideas, that I've been familiar with for years and years, that they've all been on the fringe in the United States and in the West in general, and suppressed. And now here it's coming out of the mouth of the Secretary of State. It shows that this reality is seeping through. It may be a longer process than we hope to finally really, implement this new awareness. But it does show that reality amazingly has seeped through to somebody like a real establishment figure. Let's not forget that. Rubio was very much an establishment Republican, but he gets it. He I don't know if he watched a video or he just looked at the reality. He started to really reflect on what was happening in the world, and it just, he had to accept what the real trends were, and the need for the U.S. to, make adjustments. It's not just that, he didn't just say that there is this multipolar world that we must come to terms with, but he also says we got to start doing diplomacy again. It's just that other powers have interests. That's again a very, very encouraging thing. And we just didn't see that under Blinken. We didn't see anything like that under Blinken.
Okay, well, let's end there on a positive note. Okay.
Wow, right, thanks a lot, on a positive note.
Semi-positive, definitely positive.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot, Dad. Have a good rest of your day.
No problem. You too.